Have you ever dared to look into the darkness of abandoned asylums? They say these places are where nightmares are born and where the echoes of the tortured still linger. Tonight, we'll dive into the shadows of 3 asylums, each with a story so terrifying that it will chill you to the bone. If you think you're brave enough, keep watching, but remember, some doors are best left unopened. Story 1, The Lost Souls of Blackwood Asylum. Blackwood Asylum was built in the early 1900s. Its purpose was to house society's undesirables, the mentally ill, the criminals, and those society wanted to forget. It was a place of unimaginable horrors, where patients were subjected to inhumane treatments. But the most disturbing part was the disappearances. Patients would vanish without a trace, their names erased from records, as if they never existed. Local legends say that the souls of the lost still roam its dark hallways, seeking revenge for the torment they endured. One group of urban explorers decided to test the truth of these legends. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they broke into the asylum one stormy night, hoping to capture the paranormal on film. They never expected what came next. Deep in the asylum, they came across an old operating room. In the center of the room stood a rusted gurney, and around it, the faint smell of decay. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The group huddled together, their breaths visible in the icy air. Then, they heard a faint whisper. It started as a low murmur, but quickly grew louder, echoing off the walls until it became a chorus of agonized screams. One of the explorers, a girl named Emily, screamed and pointed toward the door. There, in the dim light, stood the shadowy outline of a figure. It moved slowly toward them, its footsteps silent, its face hidden in the darkness. They turned to run, but the door they came through was now closed. Desperation set in as they pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Emily felt a cold hand grip her shoulder, and when she turned, the figure was right behind her. She let out a blood-curdling scream as the lights flickered and then went out. In the pitch black, they could hear the whispering again, this time right in their ears. "Join us, stay with us." Only 2 of the explorers made it out that night. When the authorities arrived, they found the asylum completely empty, save for one thing, a camera lying on the ground, its screen cracked, but still recording. The footage showed the group running, the shadows chasing them, and finally, the camera falling to the floor. The last frame. A distorted, ghostly face staring directly into the lens. Story 2, The Echoes of Red Grove Asylum. Red Grove Asylum was shut down in the 1950s after a series of gruesome incidents. Patients were subjected to barbaric treatments, but what truly made Red Grove infamous were the experiments conducted in the basement. The head doctor, Dr. Halstead, was obsessed with curing the patients, but his methods were more akin to torture. And some say his victims still haunt the asylum to this day. A few years ago, a paranormal investigation team decided to spend a night inside Red Grove to document any supernatural occurrences. They set up cameras and recording devices throughout the asylum, but the basement was where they focused most of their attention. According to records, it was where the most activity was reported: doors slamming shut, whispers, and shadows moving in the corners of the eye. As they descended into the basement, the air grew thick, almost suffocating. In the center of the room was an old operating table, still stained with what looked like dried blood. They began their EVP session, asking questions into the dark. At first, there was silence. Then, through the static of the recorder, they heard a faint voice. "Help us," it whispered. One of the investigators, Mark, felt a sudden pressure on his chest, as if an invisible force was trying to push him down onto the operating table. He struggled to breathe, his eyes wide with terror. The others rushed to his side, but as they tried to pull him away, the door to the basement slammed shut, plunging them into complete darkness. In the pitch black, they heard the unmistakable sound of metal scraping against the floor. The table was moving. It slid across the room toward them, as if being pushed by unseen hands. The team frantically tried to open the door, but it was stuck fast. Then, a loud, guttural scream filled the room, followed by a cold, bone-chilling laughter. When they finally burst through the door and escaped the basement, they found themselves back in the main hallway. But something was wrong. The hallway seemed different, distorted. They turned to look back at the basement door, only to find it gone. In its place was a solid brick wall, as if the basement never existed. To this day, Mark has never spoken about what happened in that basement. The footage they captured was grainy and distorted, but you could make out the shadowy figures moving in the darkness and the unmistakable sound of that chilling laughter. Red Grove remains abandoned, its secrets buried deep within its walls. Story 3, The Silent Asylum of White Cliff. White Cliff Asylum was built on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the sea. It was meant to be a place of peace for its patients, away from the chaos of the world. But peace was the last thing anyone found there. The asylum quickly gained a reputation for its silent treatments, where patients were locked in soundproof rooms for days, left alone with their own madness. One night, during a violent storm, a nurse named Margaret went to check on the patients in the silent ward. But as she walked down the corridor, she noticed something strange. The air was still, and the usual sounds of the building, the creaking floors, the howling wind, were completely gone. It was as if the asylum itself was holding its breath. When she reached the first room, she looked through the small window and froze. The patient, who had been sedated and restrained, was standing in the center of the room, staring directly at her. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. She quickly moved to the next room, and the next. Each patient was the same, standing, staring, mouthing silent words. In a panic, Margaret rushed to the staff room to call for help, but the phone line was dead. She turned to find her fellow nurses, but the hallways were empty. It was as if everyone had vanished. She could feel eyes on her, watching her from the shadows. Then, she heard it, the faintest whisper, barely audible. "Join us," in the silence. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. She grabbed a flashlight and shone it down the hallway. In the beam of light, she saw them, the patients, now standing outside their rooms, their faces twisted in unnatural grins. They moved toward her silently, their footsteps making no sound. Margaret backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned and ran toward the exit, but the asylum was a maze, each hallway leading her deeper into its depths. Finally, she found the front door, but when she tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. Behind her, the whispers grew louder, surrounding her, echoing in her mind. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the asylum staff arrived to find the front door wide open. They searched the building but found no trace of Margaret. The patients were back in their rooms, silent as ever. The only thing they found was Margaret's flashlight, lying in the center of the main hall, still on. White Cliff Asylum was closed shortly after, and it remains abandoned to this day. They say if you stand near the cliffs at night, you can hear the whispers of the patients and the faint echo of Margaret's screams, carried away by the wind. These asylums may be abandoned, but their dark histories are far from forgotten. The souls that suffered within their walls still cry out, reminding us that some places hold onto their nightmares. If you ever find yourself near one of these places, remember you might not be alone.